Picture this, you're scrolling through your feed, bombarded by loud music, fast cuts, and endless noise. Then, suddenly, you stumble across a video of Dan Preston. You catch him mid-task. There's a thick layer of dust on his workwear, rough-hewn stone and aged timber scattered at his boots, and he's just working. There are no flashy transitions, no dramatic background tracks, and definitely no manufactured over-the-top reactions. It's just the steady, rhythmic pulse of a man quietly bringing forgotten ruins in rural France back to life. Yet, within seconds, you stop scrolling. You watch. You breathe a little easier. Why? What is it about a quiet man stacking stones that absolutely captivates us? The truth is, the heavy lifting you see on screen is only a fraction of the real story. There is a deeply rooted history behind those calloused hands, and once you understand the journey that led him to these ruins, it changes the way you look at every single wall he rebuilds. The boy who learned through his hands. Dan grew up in Hampshire, England, worlds away from YouTube algorithms or any desire to live his life in the public eye. From the very beginning, he wasn't the kind of kid who thrived trapped behind a desk in a traditional classroom. Dan was a kinesthetic learner. He absorbed the world through touch, repetition, and hands-on trial and error. If a gadget was broken, he didn't want to read a manual about it. He wanted to take it apart, feel the gears, and figure out how to make it whole again. If a job needed doing, he'd rather roll up his sleeves and try than sit around discussing it. He was naturally drawn to the quieter, deeper rhythms of the world. Long walks in the woods, the restorative stillness of natural spaces, and the kind of simple, daily routines that give a racing mind permission to slow down. These weren't just escapes from the modern world. They were the very core of who he was. He was also anchored by a deep sense of family. Growing up, Dan spent countless hours helping his relatives with practical tasks, home repairs, and everyday projects. It instilled in him a profound, quiet lesson. Taking the time to do a job properly isn't just work, it's a form of care. From the heat of the kitchen to the chill of the stone. That exact foundation naturally pushed Dan into an intense, demanding field, the world of hospitality. Before the stones and mortar, Dan actually trained professionally as a chef in the UK. If you know anything about professional kitchens, you know they are absolute pressure cookers. They demand military-grade discipline, split-second timing, obsessive attention to detail, and the rare ability to stay completely calm when everything around you is chaotic. The grueling shifts and sky-high expectations leave zero room for ego, hesitation, or complaining. For Dan, cooking was about much more than plating food. It forged his entire philosophy on work. When you watch him today, you can actually see the ghost of the chef in the builder. The meticulous way he organizes his tools, his unwavering focus on the singular stone right in front of him, and his quiet resilience when the labor is heavy and exhausting. It all traces back to the kitchen. He had mastered the art of performing under immense pressure without ever losing his center. The pivot. It was exactly this unique blend, a love for quiet nature, a gift for working with his hands, and an ironclad discipline forged in the kitchen, that eventually pushed Dan to a crossroads. He was about to make a quiet, leap-of-faith decision that wouldn't just change his zip code, but would change the entire trajectory of his life. Here is the next part of the story, keeping that engaging, inspiring, and grounded tone to bring his journey to life. The quiet grafter of Lalande. After years of the grind in the UK, Dan made a choice that many of us only daydream about. He packed up and moved to France. He wasn't chasing fame or fortune, he was chasing space, a slower pace of life, and the deeply human desire to build something tangible with his own two hands. That pursuit of a quieter life ironically placed him right in the public eye. When viewers first caught a glimpse of Dan on the Chateau Diaries, filmed at Château de Lalande, he was already doing exactly what he would become known for. He rolled up in his van, tools in the back, ready to tackle the heavy, unglamorous jobs, whether it was wrestling with overgrown gardens, repairing ancient gates, or constructing outdoor structures. Dan was the guy you called when you needed strength, patience, and consistency. He never marched on camera to declare himself an expert, and he never drummed up fake drama. If an explanation of the work was helpful, he gave it. If it wasn't, he kept his mouth shut and kept working. In an era of loud internet personalities, that absolute simplicity was magnetic. Stephanie Jarvis, the chateau's owner, quickly came to rely on him. Why? Because Dan didn't just understand buildings, he understood the land. He was endlessly adaptable. One week he was mowing acres of grass, the next he was hauling fallen timber or quietly problem-solving a renovation issue. He never claimed to know it all, he just shared what he knew and got to work. A slower pace, escaped to rural France. As his presence grew, Dan picked up a camera to document his own projects, launching his channel, Escape to Rural France. This was a different side of Dan. The pace was slower, the days were longer, and the work was deeply solitary. There was no character being played here. Viewers watched a man genuinely navigating the grit of rural living, planning out massive tasks, and laying bricks without a single ounce of embellishment. It was raw, honest, and incredibly grounding to watch. Alongside the bricks and mortar, Dan was also building a life. He lived with his long-term partner, Annalise, and their 2 young boys. Early videos gave glimpses into a warm, shared home and a stable rural routine. It was a balance many viewers deeply admired. So when the dynamic began to shift, people naturally noticed. Dan was appearing less at the family home and spending more time working alone. In true Dan fashion, there was no dramatic announcement or airing of dirty laundry, a silence that was entirely intentional. Around 2021, their separation became public. Life changes, responsibilities shift, and sometimes, even with the best intentions and the deepest care, relationships evolve in ways no one plans. What truly matters is how they handled it. They didn't blame the internet, the vlog, or the pressure of the work. They kept the deeper reasons private, exactly where they belong, and focused entirely on co-parenting and keeping their boys' lives stable. It was handled with a quiet dignity that is all too rare today. The impossible ruin. You might expect a man going through a major life transition to seek out comfort, to downsize, rest, and take it easy. But Dan went in the exact opposite direction. He took everything he had and poured it into a colossal, seemingly impossible challenge, Château de Chaumont. When Dan bought it, it wasn't a fixer-upper. It was a corpse. Devastated by a catastrophic fire in the late 1980s, the 19th century building had been entirely reclaimed by nature. The roof had collapsed, the interior floors were completely gone, and massive trees were literally leaning against the fragile stone walls. Roots had violently pushed through whatever was left of the foundation. To a normal person, it was dangerous, uninhabitable, and utterly beyond saving. But Dan saw the bones. He saw the history. Local lore and historical accounts suggest that during the Second World War, this very building served as a refuge for Jewish children. It's a profound layer of history that adds immense weight to the stone. This was a place that had once offered protection and hope in the darkest of times, and Dan was determined to bring it back to life. With no electricity, no running water, and the sky serving as his roof, Dan moved onto the site. He built a simple Mongolian yurt on the grounds, outfitted it with a wood stove, a bed, and his tools. Then the real work began. For months, his only job was hauling out decades of burnt debris by hand, piece by piece, just to uncover the original floor level. From there, it was a monumental climb, rebuilding floors from scratch, wrestling massive structural beams into place, and slowly, painstakingly reconstructing the roof, wing by wing. Some days he mixed mortar until his arms gave out. Other days, he hauled heavy timber. He didn't know how to do all of it when he started. But just like the boy who used to take broken things apart to see how they worked, Dan learned as he went. The progress was agonizingly slow, but brick by brick, it was undeniably real. Here is the final inspiring chapter of the script, designed to leave your audience feeling deeply connected to the reality of the build. The fellowship of the ruin. As solitary as the work often seemed, Dan wasn't entirely alone in the trenches. Every monumental build needs a crew you can trust, and for Dan, that lifeline came in the form of his good mates, Nick and Brian. Nick became the master of the wild grounds, endlessly pushing back the overgrown forest and managing the massive, dangerous trees so the site remained safe to navigate. Then there was Brian. Armed with a sharp Irish wit and a deeply technical mind, Brian became the structural anchor of the operation. He was the guy crunching the complex measurements, calculating roof pitches, and helping maneuver thousands of pounds of timber into the sky. Together they formed a quiet brotherhood of heavy labor, working grueling days from first light until the sun dipped below the tree line, solving one impossible problem after another. And the sheer grit paid off. By mid-2024, the transformation was undeniable. 2 massive roof sections had been painstakingly rebuilt from nothing. A third was well underway, leaving only the central tower waiting for its resurrection. After decades of rot and silence, the chateau was finally taking shape against the skyline once again. The reality of the grind, funding the dream. But here is where the story gets incredibly real, and it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of Dan's entire journey. People often look at a project of this massive scale and assume there's a television network footing the bill, a hidden production company pulling the strings, or deep-pocketed sponsors dictating the narrative. But the truth? It is fiercely, entirely independent. The bricks, the massive oak beams, the endless bags of mortar, it's all funded by the community. Through Patreon support, YouTube AdSense, and the goodwill of viewers who just want to see the building survive. This chateau is being rebuilt, view by view. When your entire livelihood and project budget rely on the unpredictable nature of internet algorithms, every single video matters. It is a massive, stressful risk. The vast majority of what comes in goes right back into the dirt, the tools, and the structural integrity of the building. But operating this way buys Dan something a TV network never could: absolute creative control. There are no fake deadlines constructed for drama. There are no forced storylines. What you see on screen is exactly what is happening in the mud, more than just stone. Ultimately, what keeps millions of people coming back week after week isn't just the architecture. Dan Preston is doing something far more profound than just restoring stone walls and timber beams. He is restoring continuity. He is bridging the gap between a forgotten past and a functioning present. In a world that is so quick to throw away what is broken, he is proving that with enough patience, purpose, and raw physical effort, even the most devastated things can be rebuilt. What is your favorite part of Dan's journey so far? Do you think you could take on a project of this scale? Let us know down in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of incredible restorations.